So when I was writing by hand, um, there was one point where I realized that I could not write the letter G. And I've got in the book, actually, there's a photograph of a page in my journal where I wrote the letter G 20 times and I hated all of them. Um, and after the book came out, I started running workshops. And um, in these workshops, the atmosphere was really interesting because although people were interested, when they heard that they were actually going to have to write something by hand themselves, everybody got really self-conscious and gloomy. And it's like, oh, I hate my handwriting, etc. And I said, I want you to write one word. I want you to write the word giggling. And the point is that nobody except maybe a professional calligrapher would write the word giggling in such a fashion that all four G's were identical. In fact, when you write a G in particular at the beginning of a word, you typically do it differently than if it's at the end of the word because the descender wraps around and heads over towards the rest of the word. When you have two of them side by side, there's something about it that means that you cannot possibly bring the same degree of intentionality to both of them. So they're bound to be different, and they're different side by side. You're going to go, ugh. And then the G at the end, often people kind of wrap it back up and around as if it's cocooning the whole word. Anyway, so I had them do this. And then I said, okay, I want you to show your stuff to each other. And it was fascinating because the entire atmosphere in the room changed. Because instead of people looking at their own writing with that critical eye, maybe the memories of their teacher when they were 7 years old, criticizing their writing, they were now into something that I call the betaverse, which is the fact that there's the alphabet where every letter is supposed to look like this. And then there's the betaverse, which is every letter is different every time you write it. Everybody does it differently. Everything is elastic and all of it's permissible. And they would look at each other's and they would say, oh, you do your G like this. I do mine like this. And they were happy. And they were talking to each other about writing, and they were realizing that everybody is kind of a gift. So when you write by hand, it's like a gift of self that you're giving to other people, to your reader, to whatever. And that's what it became. So it went from this angst-ridden, fraught mental state to this kind of joyous celebration. I had to stop them. After about 10 minutes, everyone is still happily babbling away and looking at each other's writing and talking things, noticing stuff. It's like, oh, yeah, you do the dot over the I, but it's over that side. When I do the dot over the I, it's actually behind. And they're doing all of this discovery. And so G has become my favorite letter because it is, that rhythmic gymnastic sport where you have a human being with a stick with a ribbon on the end of it. Well, the loop of the G is pretty much straightforward, right? But the descender and what you do with it, there are so many different things you can do with it that it's like the ribbon on the end of the stick in the rhythmic gymnastics. And people are going to do different things with it. And so it shows just how much pleasure you can get from articulating a letter on paper. And you don't even think in those terms if you think of writing just as an information technology, or if you think of writing as being something which is supposed to look like this, but you can't do it like that anymore. Maybe you could when you were 9 or whatever. And you suddenly kind of go, whoa, this huge ocean just opened in front of me. And it's all mine. It's all everybody's. We can do this. We can explore this ourselves.